Okay, everybody, welcome to Chapter 9, which deals with collective bargaining, labor relations, basically the union chapter. And just to give you a little bit of background, this is kind of one of my favorite topics. I have been a proud union member, both Medicine Hat College, Athabasca University, and Grand Prairie Regional College for the past 30 years. In fact, a little bit of time when I was at Grand Prairie Regional College on the executive of our union as both the treasurer and secretary for a number of years. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart. Okay, so let's dive right into it. Take a look at the key idea, and this is a rather dense key idea, but we'll kind of sort of work our way through this. Okay, in Canada, most workers have the opportunity, so they can if they choose, to unionize and access a series of legally permitted processes. Okay, that's important, like collective bargaining and grievances, that are negotiated into a collective agreement, sometimes known as, or mostly known as, the contract with an employer. The contract limits management's rights and grants workers extra rights by setting parameters around many aspects of the employment relationship. For example, wages, assignment of overtime, etc. That would otherwise be decided solely by management. All right, so just to give you a little bit more background here, when you unionize, okay, you are working under a collective agreement or a contract. All right, the other one here, and that contract limits management rights. Just to give you a really simple example of management rights is, let's say there was overtime that had to be assigned. Okay, so a lot of employees like the opportunity to get overtime because you're getting time and a half, make a little bit more money. So if you were at a firm that didn't have a contract, it would be up to the manager to decide, who gets overtime. All right, he could give it to his idiot brother-in-law, for example, or he could give it to his favorite employee. If you were under a collective agreement, the collective agreement would have a term, often has a term in there that says overtime will be assigned on basis on seniority. So the person who's been there the longest gets the first crack at those overtime hours. All right. So that clause about overtime that compels the manager to give the overtime or give the first right of refusal to overtime to the senior employee has limited his or her management rights. And that's essentially what you do in a collective agreement is things that otherwise would be decided by the managers are decided by the contract. Okay, what else you need? Okay, and the other part here, we'll just talk, is Canada, most workers have the opportunity to unionize. Okay, so you can choose. You can choose to unionize, in which there will be a new set of rules, which gives you more power, which is kind of good. On the other hand, if you choose to unionize, there's two disadvantages as a worker. Number one, you have to pay for the privilege, so there's union dues, and they can be substantial, anywhere from 2 to 3% of salary is, yeah, just to give you an idea what typical union dues can range to. And then you also give up your right to negotiate your own bargain. So you might feel that you could get a better bargain because you're just so brilliant by organizing your own or negotiating your own deal with the employer. In a unionized environment, you give up that right. Okay, it's the group negotiates a deal on behalf of the group. All right, lots in that. Okay, and lots in that overview, and lots in objectives. There's 6 of them this time here, and a fair bit of content. So we'll go through it. Just another note about me is, yeah, with labor relations, it's a rather large field. We're spending one chapter on this. I took whole courses in labor relations. In fact, 1/3 of my second year in my master's degree in human resource management dealt with labor relations. So we're really, even though there appears to be a lot of content here, we're just scratching the surface. Okay, objective 1. Define unions and labor relations and their role in organizations. So this is really a background objective, right? So a lot of terminology and then just some really interesting background information. Okay, a couple key definitions. Number one, labor relations, the field of study which examines the dealings and relationship between unions and employers. Okay, so we're talking about labor relations. We're talking about the relationship that an employer has with its union. What is a union? An organization. So it's a group formed to collectively represent. Okay, so you're no longer negotiating one-on-one, you're negotiating with the group. To collectively represent the interests of employees when dealing with the employer, and it's recognized by law. Okay, so it's not just you versus the employer. Okay, when you're in a union situation, it's your crew versus the employer, your boys versus the employer, your gang versus the employer. Okay, and the advantage of that for employees is there's strength in numbers. If you decide to go on strike, the employer goes, you can be replaced. If your whole crew decides to go on strike, then the employer has a problem, right? So there's strength in numbers, power, leverage. Okay, if you find yourself in a situation as an employer where there's a union on the horizon, you have kind of three decisions. Number one, you can accept or actively oppose unionization. Particularly, we do that in the certification process. Assuming that the union does get certified, the next one is you need to do is negotiate the collective agreement or bargain about the contract. And once you have the contract, then you have to work within the contract, administer the collective agreement. So you actually have to start following things like overtime is assigned on seniority, not overtime is assigned to your favorite person. Okay, what else we got here? Types of unions you have. You have craft unions. So these are people who are all in the same trade. So an electrician's union, for example. And you have industrial unions, same employer. So at Superstore, the United Food and Commercial Workers, I got that one, represent all the employees at Superstore, all the electricians, the grocery clerks, the people who stock the shelves, things like that. In Canada these days, there are some craft unions, like there's electricians and pipe fitters, and my brother's a member of the scaffolders union, but it's more common to have industrial unions. So same employer, something like the UFCW at Superstore, or Unifor at the auto workers, some place like GM. Okay, a union local then is a sort of a branch, okay, of the industrial union. So the Alberta Union of Public Employees, for example, has a local of Medicine Hat College who represent the non-managerial and non-faculty people are represented by the AUPE. And they have a local at Medicine Hat College. And then on the other end, you have labor congresses, so an association of different labor groups. So the UFCW, for example, would belong to the Canadian Labor Congress, okay, which is kind of a just an association of groups. When it was at Grand Prairie Regional College, we are union local or association local, belonged to a group called CEPA, which was a group of faculty associations or faculty unions of the other colleges across Alberta. All right, a little bit of history. I love history. If you ever get a chance to take history courses, take history courses. I don't know if you have options in your programs, but history is just a great option to take. Anyway, so the first unions or first national labor organization formed in 1873, okay, was when they started to get organized. Labor activities escalated. Winnipeg General Strike is a seminal event in the Canadian labor history. And this one here, collective bargaining was recognized in Canada started to be recognized in Canada legally in 1937. Before 1937, you could have a union, but it was up to the employer or not to recognize whether they wanted to deal with that union, right? When collective bargaining was recognized, if you formed a legal union, then the employer was compelled to bargain with you, okay? So that's a key date, right around just before the war, right at the end of the Depression here. This was interesting. Collective bargaining for federal government employees in 1967. The first recognition of collective bargaining is for private sector employees. Government employees, first with some provincial governments, and then finally with the federal governments, weren't allowed to unionize until the 60s, 1967. And that's significant because if you look at the number of union employees right now, it's much more skewed towards the public sector than the private sector, but we'll get to that in a couple slides here. The golden age for unions, the 60s and 70s, visible champions for workplace safety and maternity benefits. So they fought and won for a lot of the workplace safety rules that we've got right now. They were instrumental in getting those, and maternity or paternity leave in the 60s and 70s. The peak of union membership in Canada was in 1994 at 36.1. It has declined since then to about 30%, and the States, it's roughly half that. Okay, so it's declined somewhat in Canada. It's really declined in the States. And again, a point I just made up here earlier is unionization in the public sector is much higher than in the private sector. So it's much more likely you'll find unionization with teachers, nurses, government employees than the private sector. Traditionally, the private sector unions were miners, auto workers, some retail, but those are kind of declining sectors as well. Okay, so many more union members as a percentage of the workforce in the public sector than the private sector. Okay, so this slide speaks to union density, which is a nice little definition, which you should remember. So density refers to the percentage of workers in that industry who belong to unions. So if you look at public administration, so these are government employees and the like, 72.1%, so 3 out of 4 across Canada here. Utilities, power companies, fairly high. Education, health, and social services, teachers and nurses, 61%. And then you look down here, bottom ones here, there's a little bit, 13% in wholesale retail trade, financial services, professional services, so like accounting firms, banks, 1 out of 10, entertainment and restaurants, for example, or actors, you know, very, very low. Okay, so the TLDR, I love that. Too long didn't read. More union employees in the public sector than private sector. The other way to look at union density, which again is the percentage of people working in a union, is by province. So about 30% for Canada, and it ranges quite a bit. So if you look at Newfoundland, bye, God bless you, bye. And Quebec, about 38%. So much more popular than in other provinces. You look at the bottom, guess what? It's, yes, we are last. We are trailing the pack in terms of unionization. 25% of Alberta workers. Okay, so that's quite a difference, right? So you wonder why everybody hates unions in Alberta, or people don't know a lot about unions in Alberta. Is one of the reasons is, you know, 3 out of 4 people don't belong to the union, whereas in a place like Labrador or Quebec, 4 to 10 do, right? So it's much more common in some places than others, right? The other thing that's interesting with the union density is look at it by country, right? So in the States, I said it's roughly 15%. If you go down to the southern part of some of the states, you know, a place like Louisiana, for example, almost 0% union, and that has to do a lot with laws. Okay, so the too long didn't read. Unions are more widespread in Newfoundland and Quebec. In Alberta, not so much. Okay, like I said, union membership has declined in Canada from 1994 by about 6%, about 30% right now. So from, you know, a little more than 1 out of 3 to less than 1 out of 3. Why has it done this? Number one, change in the structure of the economy, growth in non-unionized service industries. So traditionally, there were a lot of union members in industries like mining or auto assembly, and those are kind of declining industries. Okay, yeah, like a lot of automation has taken away a lot of those jobs. If you look at some of the non-unionized service industries that grow in tech, high tech, for example, very few union people. Services and retail, again, low rates of unionization. Okay, so going from a manufacturing to a services economy has led to a decline. Management efforts to control costs. And again, you look at the auto workers, for example. So rather than assemble autos in Canada and the United States, it's a lot cheaper for them to outsource that to a place like Mexico, where, yeah, they don't, yeah, so some of those jobs that have been outsourced to other places, right? And they used to be good, well-paying union jobs. Human resource practices, okay? One of the reasons you unionize, or probably main, is to get better terms and conditions. So employers pay better, they have better safety, they have better benefits, okay? They might even have a grievance procedure. So in a case like that, what are you bargaining for anymore? Why would I want a union to get all these things when the employer is giving me these things, okay? Because I'd have to pay union dues. Wouldn't it be great to be able to have a grievance procedure, to have good wages without having to pay for 2 or 3% of your wages in union dues in order to get this? And the last one is government regulation. Number one, governments have increased things like workplace safety. Okay, so again, less of a need for union. And the other one is decreased union protections. So governments, particularly in the United States and in some places in Canada, are less union friendly than they used to be. And government regulations. So increased workplace safety, for example. So you don't have to get union to fight for workplace safety, and decreased union protections. So particularly around areas like striking. We used to have a beer strike every summer in Alberta right in the late 70s. We haven't had a beer strike in years. And one of the reasons is, the government and society is less tolerant of those types of work stoppages. So government regulations, have made it less friendly for unions in a lot of places, particularly in the United States. Now, this is an interesting slide. Union impact on performance. Okay, do unions decrease productivity, increase productivity? What happens here? Okay, so can they decrease productivity? Absolutely. Okay, work rules and limits set by union contracts. The classic one is if we want to change a light bulb around here, we have to call an electrician to do that, okay? If you're just a run-of-the-mill grunt, you can't change a light bulb, the electrician does that. So yeah, something like that a work rule like that would decrease productivity. And again, production loss to union activities like strikes. And again, strikes are a lot less common than they used to be. Can unions increase productivity? Absolutely. Reduce turnover. Get better wages, you get better terms and conditions. People don't leave. You get a nice cushy union job, people tend to hang around, right? Seniority-based pay systems. So the fact that you're not battling with your co-workers over trying to get that promotion, okay, because your promotion is based, or your pay is based on how long you've been there, rather than your performance. So encourage cooperation rather than competition. And employer may be forced to improve management practices, okay? So if you have a union contract there, you can't do things like give the job to your idiot brother-in-law or play favorites, okay? Because a contract prevents you from doing that. There's certain things there's procedures that you have to follow, and often that's a seniority system. Okay, so bottom line is research has showed us that union workers are actually more productive. And you're going, what? That doesn't make sense. Now, follow me what I'm saying here. More productive. They produce more per worker. So a union worker will produce more widgets per hour than a non-union worker, mostly due to this stuff. However, the overall cost is higher. Unions employees are paid what's called a union premium, more than the non-union employees. So even though you're getting more widgets per hour out of the worker, your overall cost or your cost per worker is higher. All right, lots there. Let's cycle back, take a look at that one. Define unions, labor relations, and their role in organizations here. So a couple things. Number one, unions, employees can choose to bargain collectively. Okay, it's up to their choice. And there's advantages and disadvantages for the employee. Secondly, the percentage of workers in unions in Canada has declined to 30, all right, from 36. So about a little less than 1 in 3. And most of the union percentage of, or the highest percentage of people in unions are in the public sector, so nurses, teachers, government employees. And the third thing is union members are paid more. Okay, so your cost per worker is higher, but your production per worker tends to be better. All right. Get her, got her good. There was a lot in that one. Okay, this one's a little later. Number 2 says, identify the labor relations goals of oops, let's try that again. Identify labor relation goals of management, labor unions, and society. Okay, so there's 3 players when we talk about labor relations. You've got the employer, you got the union, and you got society, which is government. Okay, so what are the goals? Okay, management. So what's management trying to get out of this here? Well, they're trying to make money, obviously. Okay, makes sense. And second of all, they are trying to maintain control and making decisions, management rights. All right. Okay, so they want to have control over things like hiring the best people to do the jobs, right? You wouldn't want to give up something like that, your ability to hire the best people and put them in jobs. Okay, that would be eroding your management rights to a point where you wouldn't want that. Okay, so they're trying to maintain control over the workplace, make some money. The union, what are they trying to do? Obtain better working conditions, pay, job security, etc., right? Which kind of runs counter to profits, or can run counter. The more I have to pay my workers, less I have the profits. Okay, I mean, we'll talk about union cooperation a little bit later and win-win situations, but generally speaking, that part of it is a zero-sum game. And the other thing they want is voice in decisions, and what they're trying to do is reduce management rights. So for example, who gets overtime? Okay, who gets the first crack at overtime? All right, if you do it on a seniority system, that gives me the power. It's not up to some manager who's going to give it to his brother-in-law or guy sucking up and who's the manager's pet or favorite. Society, which is the third player, which is government, ensure neutral rules to provide a balance of power between the employers and the unions. Okay, so basically government, which we call it society, is they want to make it fair. Okay, so they want to make it fair to the point so workers aren't rioting in the streets. Okay, because of the unfairness of the system here, right? They also want to make sure that the economy doesn't get trashed as well, right? So they're trying to balance those two. Okay, so society or government, they are the, I'll get to more of this later, but they are the referee in the system. It's a 3-actor system. We've got management, unions, and government, government, which represents society, and the government is the referee. Okay, additional goals and provisions. Seniority-based decisions about people. It's considered objective. So particularly when it comes to wages, okay, every year you get a raise, okay, based on up to a certain number of years. Who gets the promotion? seniority-based, who gets first crack at overtime, right? So the advantage of the seniority-based system, at least from the employee's point of view, is it's considered objective. Okay, it's not up to the discretion of a fallible manager. All right. Another additional goal is social unionism, where the union tries to influence social and economic government policies. Okay, example was unions were instrumental in providing universal prescription of drug coverage, okay, for seniors. The other way to look at that, or quite simply, is political action. So traditionally in Canada, the Labor has been affiliated with the NDP, right? They're more labor friendly, so unions will sometimes get involved in the political process in order to get governments that are more union friendly rather than employer friendly, right? So UCP in particular is not a particularly union friendly party. The other goal is union security, okay, to address the concerns about a free rider, okay? What a free rider is somebody who gets the benefit without having to pay the cost. So an example in this context would be, let's say you worked at a place that had a union, the union negotiated all these really good terms and conditions, all right? And you go, yeah, great, I'll work at this place, I'll take those terms and conditions, but I don't particularly feel like being part of the union, okay? And I certainly don't particularly feel like giving 2 or 3% of my salary to be part of this union, right? So yeah, I'll take all these benefits, but I'm not going to pay with my union dues. All right, so union security provisions address this concern. It doesn't allow for free riders, okay? And those are RAND formula, check-off provision, and closed union shop, right? So how do you put this? In some places, you may not necessarily have to join the union. They can't compel you to be part of the union unless it's a closed shop. On the other hand, you still have to pay the union dues. So yeah, okay, I'm not part of the union, but we're still going to deduct that 2 or 3% of your salary. And to do this, they do it at the source. It's called a check-off provision, all right? So rather than you getting a bill from your union at the end of the month for 2 or 3% of your salary, it's taken right off your check. And this is a real advantage for the union, right? Because otherwise, you're in a situation where they have to collect. And it's really tough that, you're going after a member, somebody in your organization for non-payment of dues, right? And that's, it's awkward, right? So if you're able to get the employer to deduct right at the source, that's one headache that you don't have. And again, it really helps with the sustainability of your organization. Okay, a little shorter on that one. Recap, identify the labor relations goals, and yeah. Okay, so what to remember, there's 3 parties. There's the management or the employer, there's the union or the employees, and there's society, which are government. There are 3 players. Management and labor, they're really kind of battling over control of the workplace. Okay, and the government is in the middle. Okay, they are the referees in this, trying to make it fair for both sides. So that's a fair fight, I guess is the way that they talk about it. Learning objective 3, summarize the laws and regulations that affect labor relations. Okay, so there's some key laws, terms and conditions around how the system works here. All right, so labor relation law, federally regulated. Remember back to chapter 2, we talked about federally regulated industries like banking, federal government, crown corporations, transportation, and other. And okay, so the federally regulated private sectors are regulated by the Canada Labor Code. Okay, note in Alberta, we said that probably 93% of people fall under provincial regulation. Provincial act for the most part in Alberta is the Alberta Labor Relations Code. Now, for the most public sector employees fall under different, college employees, at least it's at one point, fell under a different legislation. But yeah, Alberta Labor Relations Code for most provincially provincially regulated industries. Okay, you need to know that act here. What else? Labor relation laws are designed to protect the interests of both the employee and employer, okay, to set a level playing field, right? So to the point where you got to make the employers profitable, obviously, okay, and that they have control over the workplace. But you don't want to skew the rules so far the employer that, you know, the employees are rioting in the streets and going on strike all the time, right? So the laws are, like I said, to present a balanced, view, okay, a level playing field. And the Labor Relations Board is the judge or the referee in this situation, right? So they are a quasi-judicial, love that word, quasi-judicial body. The idea is the Labor Relations Board, if you have a dispute, you want to keep it out of the courts. So if you've got a labor relation dispute, it's usually quite often under striking or lockouts or unfair labor practices, you go to the labor board, okay, not the courts. Okay, much like in human rights, if you have a human rights complaint, you go to the Human Rights Commission rather than court. Okay, it's supposed to be a expedited, less formal, and less costly system than suing people all the time. Big slide here, features of labor relations here. Okay, oh my God, trouble today with my mouse. Okay, number one, there are methods to certify a union. Okay, so some people, like, first of all, who can be a union? Okay, if Dylan and I don't know if you had a course from Dylan. If Dylan and I decide, yeah, Bill, let's become a union, okay, and we're not going to let everybody else in this union. Can we do that? No, we can't. Okay, there's rules on who can be in the union, how big the union has to be, who it has to represent. Yeah, right, who can't be in a union. Okay, and to certify the union, you have to have 50% plus one of your employees. So anyway, there's got to be a method in order to be recognized as a union. Okay, so that's one thing that labor relations legislation does. Second one, the requirement of the employer to recognize the union chosen. Quite often, or you know, what an employer can do in some jurisdictions, particularly in the States where they don't have strong laws, is they just ignore the union. Okay, yeah, we've certified a union, they'll go great, but they refuse to meet, refuse to bargain with them, refuse to recognize them, and after a while the union gets discouraged and falls apart. You can't do that in Canada, okay? You are compelled to bargain with that union. And that feeds into the next one, to bargain in good faith, and that essentially means be fair when you're bargaining. You can't bribe the union leaders to, you know, negotiate a really poor agreement, or you can't all of a sudden fire all the union leaders. Okay, all of a sudden, the next day, all the union leaders have been fired, right? In order to try to get a better, try to intimidate the employees into negotiating a less than good collective agreement for them. The employer is required to deduct union dues for employees. Talked about that in the last one. Okay, about union sustainability. Minimum length of a contract is 1 year. Kind of makes sense. You don't want to be constantly negotiating. Regulation of strikes and lockouts. Okay, one of the key regulations around strikes and lockouts in Canada is that you can't strike until the contract expires. Okay, so I'm in a 5-year contract, 2 or 3 years into the contract, the union says, yeah, these wages really aren't cutting it. They are not allowed to go out on strike, okay, for that, okay? So you've got to wait until your contract expires before you can strike, or lockout, which is basically the employer's version of a strike. So they've refused to provide work. All right, a good example of a lockout was a number of years ago, the NHL owners locked out the players, okay, because the players, they thought that the players were making too much money. Okay, they were getting too high a percentage of the revenue, so they locked out the players until they could negotiate that percentage of the revenue down. Creation of labor relations boards, those quasi-judicial bodies. Prohibition of unfair labor practices, and that's pretty much tied in with bargaining in good faith. All right, yeah, so example of an unfair labor practice might be for the company to try to organize a friendly union. Okay, so Unifor is thinking about organizing your company, and you say, nah, I don't want Unifor. I mean, Unifor in here, those guys are a pretty strong union. So instead you go out and you find the sisterhood of Hello Kitty Impersonators Union. Okay, so you want the Hello Kitty Union to rep. So you actually encourage the Hello Union Committee, or Hello Kitty Union to organize your place, because you feel you would be able to negotiate with them a lot easier. Okay, you can't do that. Okay, you can't interfere with the formation of a union. And the last one is a grievance procedure, a procedure to settle contract interpretations, right? So you may negotiate something into the contract, but for whatever reason, it might be unclear. I'll just give you a really simple example. So you may have negotiated into your contract that when choosing managers or when promoting people to managers, the most senior employee will be promoted. Okay, so you are a plumbing and heating company, all right? And the manager of the plumbing part of the company comes open, all right? So you have two employees, Joe, who's been there for 10 years, who works in the heating part, and Fred, who's been there for 8 years and using in the plumbing part. So the contract says most senior employee. Well, who is that? Is that Joe, who's been there for 10 years, or is it Fred, who's been there 10 years in the plumbing part? Okay, yeah, sure, Joe has been there 10 years, but he's in the heating part. Is his seniority good enough to be the manager of the plumbing department? Or when we settled on seniority, were we talking about seniority within departments? You know, the most senior plumber rather than the most senior employer, right? So that's just an example of a contract interpretation you might have, and then you have a grievance procedure set up to settle disputes like that. Usually they're not that clear cut. Okay, unfair labor practices. We went through a couple of these: interfering with the formation of a union, discriminating based on union membership or because an employee exercises their rights. Okay, so again, or intimidating or coercing a employer not to join. Classic one is disciplining a union president or something, or a union or a shop steward, somebody like that, somebody who's a senior person of the union, just to sort of make an example of them so that the rest of them fall in line, right? That's an unfair labor practice. Unions can also have unfair labor practices, trying to bargain when the union's not certified. Okay, so if they jump the gun before the certification vote. Persuading employees during working hours or at the workplace. So again, you can't conduct union business on company time, right? So you can't have a union meeting when you're supposed to be producing widgets, okay? You can't just take 20 minutes out off the assembly line and have a union meeting. Illegal strikes, like striking during the term of the agreement. And the last one here, which is very common, is failing to represent the employers fairly. So let's say Nerdy Joe, everybody knows Nerdy Joe. Nerdy Joe gets fired, and it's unfair. And everybody hates Nerdy Joe. I mean, with a name like Nerdy Joe, of course you hate Nerdy Joe. Nobody likes the guy. He's just a cantankerous guy, smells bad. Just a reprehensible human being, right? However, give it that nobody likes him and he's a reprehensible human being, the union is still compelled to represent him, okay, and unfair. Okay, so you can't, the union can't play favorites, I guess, when it comes to fighting for rights, I guess is a good way to look at that. All right, let's recap then. Number 3. Okay, so really as the law sets out the terms and conditions, or the sets out the rules for the labor relations climate, some of the key ones are that there's a certification process. So there's a legal process on how to put a union together, who can be a part, who can't be a part. There's the requirement to bargain in good faith and also not engage in unfair labor practices. The labor board is the referee, quasi-judicial body, right? The employer must deduct dues, okay, from at the source. There's rules around strikes, okay, when you can strike, when you can't strike, how many picketers, that sort of thing. And the final one is that every collective agreement needs a grievance procedure. So there has to be a means to settle disputes during the contract, okay? So exactly what did we mean by seniority with promotions? Do we mean overall seniority, or do we mean in seniority in the department? If that wasn't specified in the agreement, we've got to have a procedure to figure out what exactly we meant. Okay, on to learning objective 4, which is a really short objective. It's only one slide, so but it's an involved slide. But anyway, we'll go through this. And that objective says, describe the labor organizing process. So essentially, this tells you what you need to do if you want to get a union into a workplace. Okay, so what I'll do with this is I'll give you a little bit of an example, a sample process to organize a union. So let's just say Bill is working at a real job as opposed to teaching human resource management. He's got a real job. And his job is at Jimmy Jojo's Plumbing, Heating, and Shoe Repair, because everyone needs a place to get their shoes fixed. So Bill has been working at Jimmy Jojo's for a number of years, and he's kind of sick of Jimmy Jojo and all the exploitation he feels he gets being an employee of Jimmy Jojo's. So he figures the solution to all this is he's going to form a union. All right. So what's the first thing he does? He sets out then to get people to what it's called sign union cards. And essentially what you sign a union card is, it's not that you're necessarily going to vote for the union, but it says, yeah, this is something we can look at. This is something I'd like to consider, right? So Bill goes out and he gets all of his buddies in the plumbing department, because he's a plumber, and he gets most of the guys from the heating department, which is HVAC and the like, and most of those guys sign a card, and he doesn't bother with the shoe repair people, because yeah, nobody respects those guys, doesn't really want them to be part of his union. And lo and behold, at the end of the day here, he's got 45% of the people in the HVAC, the heating and plumbing, to sign a union card. So he goes, cool, I think I'm ready. I'm over the 35% here. I'm going to apply to the labor board for a certification vote. So what the labor board does, then, it takes a look at the proposed bargaining unit. Okay, who's Bill going to have in this bargaining unit? And he looks at his bargaining unit, and it's going to have all the plumbing guys, plumbing people, because I'm sure there's some female plumbers in there, all the heating employees, and he didn't include the shoe repair people for whatever reason. The other thing he did was he got some of the supervisors, the front level, the first line managers, we used to call them foremen in the day, to sign these union cards. So what the Labor Relations Board determines that, well, we got to make a couple tweaks to Bill's proposed bargaining unit here. First of all, the plumbing and heating guys, or plumbing and heating people, have a community of interest with the shoe repair side. So if we're going to have the certification vote, you got to put the shoe repair guys in there. And he also realizes that it's not appropriate for first level supervisors to be in the bargaining unit, because essentially they're management. You can't have management in your employees union, right? So they kind of tweak the bargaining unit. So the bargaining unit has all the non-managerial plumbing people in it, all the non-managerial heating people, all the non-managerial shoe repair, and they even throw in a couple people in the office, administrative staff to do that. So some of the admin assistants. Okay, so that's what they determine is going to be the bargaining unit. And they decide that they're going to have a certification vote on February 31st, which poses some challenges, but let's just go with this because it's a fictitious example. Okay, so between now and February 31st, Bill is out there and he's going to try to win this certification vote. So he's talking to everybody at Jimmy Jojo's plumbing and heating and shoe repair. Of course, not during working hours because that would be an unfair labor practice, but he's just sort of going around and said, hey, you know, we should really be part of this union. It's going to be great. Working conditions are going to be a lot better. We're going to make a lot more money, yada, yada, yada. And then Jimmy Jojo is also talking to people as well. He's not threatening or anything, but he's just sort of presenting the case of why you shouldn't vote for the union. Okay, is it really going to be worth your 2 to 3% union dues here? And yeah, there's going to be all these stupid rules that make it less flexible, make it a less fun place to work. All right, so Bill states his case, Jimmy Jojo states his case, and on February 31st, the government people come in, they set up the polling booth there and conduct a certification vote. And lo and behold, what happens? 55% of the people voted in favor of certifying the union. So, hey, yay, okay, because it's more than 50% plus one. We now have a bargaining unit. Okay, we're not out of the woods yet. There's 2 more steps before you have your union up and going. And the next step is to negotiate a first collective agreement with the employer. So Bill, who's kind of acting, I guess, as the de facto president of this union, gets a couple other people, and they sit down with Jimmy Jojo and they negotiate a contract. So it has wages in it, benefits in it. They finally got a dental plan because you don't want to be going to work with rotten teeth. So now we've got a dental plan. What else? We've got a commitment from Jimmy Jojo that overtime will be assigned or by seniority, not by manager's whim. And we've also got seniority with promotions. So people will get promoted into management or first line supervisor positions based on seniority. All right, so we've negotiated that agreement. We're not done yet because we've got to take that agreement back to the membership and they vote on it. Okay, so okay, here's what the agreement's going to be. We've got improvements in the wages and benefits. We've got an overtime clause in there, and we've got a clause where managers will be selected internally from people who are most senior. All right, so that goes to another vote, okay, and it's voted and it passes because it was a really good, well-negotiated agreement, and 75% of the people vote in favor of the collective agreement. So lo and behold, now your union is up and running after all that stuff. Okay, now a couple notes here is employees can also choose to change or dissolve the union, which is called a decertification vote. So let's say after a couple of years, they're really unhappy with the union, hasn't really done much for them. They're paying their 2 or 3% in union dues and not feeling that they're getting value. So Bill's rival, we'll call him Bob, decides, I want to get this union out of here. So he applies, gets a number of people to sign a petition, and he gets to apply for a decertification vote. So it can work in the other way as well. Now, the exact process, in terms of how many percentage of cards you need to sign, how many steps there are, how the labor board works, that'll vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction or province to province. But essentially, that's how you'd go about organizing a union. Okay, so to recap that very simple objective here, certification process involve, first of all, getting a certain percentage of people to sign union cards saying we'd like to take a look at this. Second, you go before the labor board and they might tweak your proposed bargaining unit. make sure that it's appropriate according to the laws and precedences of other bargaining units in the province. You have a certification vote, which you need 50% plus 1 to win. So if you get 50%, more than 50%, then you can proceed to the next step, which is negotiating the first agreement. So the first contract. And then finally, after you've negotiated that contract, the union has to take it back to its membership, and its membership votes on that contract. If they vote to approve that contract, then your union is up and running. All right, we are now at learning objective number 5, which asks you to explain how management and unions negotiate and administer collective agreements. So there's 2 things here. It's negotiating the agreement, and then once you have the agreement, actually doing something with it. Okay, so let's start with the first slide in this objective. The collective bargaining is the process of establishing, if it's the first contract, or modifying the contract of terms and conditions of employment. So for example, when we're going into a contract negotiation, often the thing that a union wants is a pay raise. Okay, so they're going to modify the terms and conditions of the way people are paid. When you're going into collective bargaining, management may want to alter the terms and conditions. They may figure that they're going into a rollback. So they're spending too much money on wages and benefits. So they could be asking for a reduction. Or more typically, management will look at changing some of the rules, trying to claw back some of the rules. So for example, there might be something in the collective agreement that says that management has to give 2 weeks notice when the work schedule comes out. And they may want to negotiate that down to 1 week in order to give themselves some more flexibility. Okay, so that's what collective bargaining is. It's taking a look at that contract and then modifying the terms and conditions. Now, a lot of times what you're doing when you're collective bargaining is you're really looking at management rights, or putting limits on management rights. Okay, so in the absence of something in the contract, management rules, right? Example, no collective agreement, management can determine who gets the overtime. Collective agreement in effect, the overtime assignment procedure is set, usually on seniority. So once you get past the wages, oftentimes a lot of the bargaining in a collective bargaining situation is the union trying to take away some of these management rights and giving it to a process as part of the contract rather than just the discretion of the individual manager. Okay, so a couple of different bargaining dynamics. There are win-lose issues. Okay, so one party's gain is the other party's loss, and typically that's pay and benefits. The more you pay your employees, the less, in most cases, your profits are going to be. You do have win-win issues. Okay, so health and safety tends to be a win-win issue. Both parties are interested in oftentimes better health and safety for a number of different reasons. Sometimes you get into gain sharing. So if we can figure out a way to do this process more efficiently, will management share some of the gains, or share some of the savings with the employees in terms of better wages. This is interesting. Inter-organizational issues and priorities. And this is with the union. So you think of the union as a collective group, but within the union there's factions. So quite often, depending on the age of your workforce, older union members generally want better pensions, okay, because they're getting pretty close to retirement. Whereas younger union members want to improve dental plans because they've got kids. Lord knows kids have rotten teeth. And you have a dental plan that saves you a lot of money on improving your kids' rotten teeth. All right, so the union, not only do they have to negotiate with management, they also have to negotiate among themselves to figure out what their bargaining priorities are going to be. Are they going to be better pensions this time, or a better dental plan? And the other thing that comes into play is attitudinal structuring. Ongoing relationship and trust is huge. So let's say, for example, we negotiated a overtime agreement that overtime will be offered to people based on their seniority. Okay, and both sides agreed to this, and then for the past 3 years during the agreement, management has many times not bothered with this. They've just given overtime to their favorite people or the first person who showed up, right? So trust can affect the negotiations as well, how smoothly they're going to go. Okay, typical collective agreement provisions. So these are the things that you'd find in a collective agreement. Number one, rights of the parties. So recognition of union security, i.e. the employer agrees that the union is the bargaining agent and agrees to deduct dues. And management also, just to reaffirm management rights. So management rights to test people for drugs and alcohol for safety. Organization of work, so technological change. If the employer wanted to bring robots in to replace workers, that might be something that has been negotiated, has to be negotiated, or the distribution of work. Who gets overtime first? If there's layoffs, okay, who gets laid off first? Labor relations ends, like having grievance procedures, and we'll talk about that in quite a bit of detail a little bit later on in a couple slides down here. So what happens if things go off the rails halfway through? How do we solve those? Disputes? Joint committees are something that managers and labor can have sometimes. And that's, you might have an issue that both parties are unhappy with. I know when I was at Grand Prairie Regional College, one of the things both the union and management was unhappy with was instructor evaluation. So we struck a joint committee which had half people from management, half faculty that took a look at the instructor evaluation process. Education and training. Okay, so will the employer pay for apprenticeships, pay for educational leaves? Will they provide training for on how to do their jobs, tools, that sort of thing? Okay, so that's in there. And probably the big one is conditions of work, pay and benefits, obviously, but also overtime rates, work schedules, etc. So if you look on page table 9.3, page 243, 244 of your textbook gives you sort of some more details about that. Okay, so what happens when bargaining breaks down? Well, the two weapons that are used are the strike and the lockout. The strike is the employee's weapon. So that's a collective decision by the union members not to work. All right, so we want a 5% increase and an improvement to our dental plan. If we don't get that, we're all going to walk out until we get that. Okay, so this is a way that the employees have leverage in order to help them get their way. Okay, a lockout is basically a strike by the employer, a refusal to provide work. And the one I always come back with this lockout was the last NHL work stoppage was a lockout. The owners were unhappy with the way that the revenue was being shared. I think the players were getting 55% of all NHL revenue went to players' salaries, 45% was left for the owners. So what they did, the players were quite happy with that. They wanted to keep it the same. The owners wanted to reduce that. So the owners actually locked out the players until they agreed to a 50-50 split. I might have my percentages wrong, but that's sort of the gist of what happened with that particular work stoppage, which was quite long. It was 9 months or something like that. Okay, so strikes and lockouts provide leverage. What else do we want to know about strikes? Work stoppages and workers involved. One of the things you should realize is that workers strike a lot less than they did back in the 80s. So if you look at back in about 1985 right here, we had peak work stoppages at 800. We also had great music at the time, like, you had the Pet Shop Boys, David Bowie, Madonna was in her prime. but we had a lot of work stoppages. We had over 800 in Canada. Look at the trend here is definitely dropping. We had a little blip, I guess, in 2015, but if you take a look at the number of work stoppages, it went from 800 in 1985 to somewhere around 200 in 2017. So we workers strike a lot less than they used to. Okay, alternatives to strike and lockout. So if you don't get strike and lockout, what can you do if you can't agree? Well, the first thing is called mediation. So in a mediation, if your bargaining is breaking down, you bring in a third party to come in, and the mediator facilitates the process. So he or she just gets people to keep talking. All right, or well, maybe would you consider this, or maybe would you consider that sort of thing. So they have no really any formal authority. They're just a third party in there just to keep people talking. Conciliation is the next step up. So what happens, you maybe get the mediator in there and still haven't got an agreement, and still doesn't look like he's going to get an agreement. So at the end of the mediation process, the mediator can write a report and say, all right, these are the reasons, these are the sticking issues. Okay, they can't agree on salary, and they can't agree on the process to change a light bulb. Okay, and he may recommend a settlement. So he may say, all right, 3%, and anybody can change the light bulb, and would be a good thing. But so he or she can recommend the settlement, but it's not binding. And the most formal is the last one, which is arbitration. And that's where you do all three of these things. So you get them talking, you write a report, and then if you still don't agree, the arbitrator actually will make a settlement, and it's a binding settlement. It says, all right, so my settlement is that the employees get a 4% increase, and anybody can change the light bulb, as the case may be. All right, so that was the bit on collective bargaining. The other half is collective agreement administration. So this is what happens when you have a disagreement during the term of the contract. Okay, and note you can't go out strike during the contract, so you need a procedure in order to settle any of those disputes you might have. And that's called the grievance procedure. So it's a process for solving any disputes arising out of administration of the collective agreement. And it's designed to ensure both parties keep their end of the bargain. So let's give you an example. Let's say you have Buddy and Benny. Okay, so Buddy is a employee, and he got fired for disrespecting authority. And the way he disrespected authority was he called his supervisor, quote unquote, a huge tool bag, whatever the heck that means. All right, so because he called Benny a huge tool bag, Benny took that as disrespect, fired Buddy. Buddy's position was, no, I wasn't being disrespectful, I was just being helpful. By calling Benny a tool bag, I was trying to inspire him to be a better supervisor. All right, so there's a dispute right here, okay, whether this was in fact insubordination or not. Okay, so step one, employer and supervisor discuss orally. Okay, so Benny and Buddy discuss the fact that, one guy thinks it's inspiring to be better, the other guy thinks it's insubordination. No agreement, we're kicking it up to step two. So in step two, the employee and a shop steward. The shop steward is a union official, so another employee in the union. It's usually a senior employee who can act as an advocate, can help the employee. And the supervisor, again, he brings in his support, so his manager, and they discuss the agreement. Okay, so between the two, it's likely going to be solved to be honest, it's likely going to be solved at this step here. I'm sure, an apology from Buddy to Benny would probably be good enough, but let's just say for argument's sake, neither party wants to give in. In that case, you'll kick it up to the third level, so senior union official, so somebody on the union executive. okay, and a senior management official. So maybe the branch manager or president of the plant or something will meet to discuss the agreement. And if they can't figure out an agreement, it goes into what's called arbitration. So union and management present their case to a third-party arbitrator. So you hire a third-party outsider, almost like court, although unlike court, it's a quasi-judicial process. It's not as formal as court, but union states the case, management states the case, arbitrator looks at it, and they render a binding decision. Okay, well, like I said, most grievances are, by the time they get to step one or step two, are solved. But if they can't agree, the ultimate thing is grievance arbitration. Okay, so let's recap that one. So let's talk about negotiating and administering collective agreements. A couple key points. So number one, collective bargaining process allows you to determine or alter the terms and conditions of employment. So those could be things like wages or things like work rules. Who can change a light bulb? Strikes, lockouts provide leverage for either side for their positions. So if the owners want something and the players don't want to give them, they can lock them out or refuse to provide work until they decide that they want to move on their position. Number three, strikes and lockouts are far less common than they used to be. Like I said, they peaked at around 800 in Canada in 1984. We're down to about 200 in 2017. Number four, arbitration, conciliation, and mediation are alternatives to strikes or lockouts. So generally, before you use those tools, you engage in one or all three of those processes. Number five, grievance procedure then is used to help solve contract interpretations. So in fact, was Buddy being insubordinate when he called Benny a tool bag, or was he really trying just to inspire him to be a better employer or be a better supervisor? Okay, we beat that one to death. This one's a little shorter. Number six, describe more cooperative and collaborative approaches to labor management relations. So what we're talking about here is not everything is an us versus them issue when it comes to labor relations, okay? So when we talk about traditional labor relations, we talk about it being an adversarial process. So a zero-sum game. One side's gain is another side's loss. If I pay my employees more money in wages, I'm going to have less profits. So my loss is their gain, and vice versa. Cooperative labor relations has the union and management working together for mutual gains on some certain issues. We call them win-win. Typically, win-win issues tend to be like safety, for example. So yeah, sure, a safer workplace is good for the employees. It's also good for the employer as well. Now, for the cooperative approach to work, a high degree of trust is needed between the union and the employer, okay? And this is not easy to achieve. Okay, so some examples of employee management cooperation, employee involvement in decision-making, okay? So we can't give you a, 5% increase this year. We can only afford a 1% increase, but hey, maybe we'll get you involved in decision-making. Would you take that? It says yes, because we have a lot of good ideas that would allow this place to make more money, and if the place made more money, you'd be able to afford to pay us more. Self-managed work teams. Okay, so it might be an example where maybe we'll get rid of the supervisors and have just teams regulate themselves. In which case, if that's a cheaper option, maybe we can split up the supervisor's wage among the people who are self-managed, because we don't need a manager anymore. Joint labor management committees on things like safety, technological change. I gave you the example of the one at Grand Prairie Regional College on instructor evaluation, where both parties were unhappy with this system, so they wanted to see it changed. Broader job descriptions. Okay, so the fact that, hey, anybody can change a light bulb. Well, if anybody can change a light bulb, then maybe we can, the place will be more efficient and we can afford to pay people more. Information sharing and just telling everybody how things are going. So if they need to work harder, they'll work harder, so they'll keep their jobs. And finally, gain sharing. Okay, so if an employee's come up with a cost-saving idea, you'll be able to split the gains. So, profits improve, and then management also, and then the employees also get a little bit of a raise if you're able to save a little bit of money. Okay, so to quickly recap, objective 6 here. Not all issues have to be win-lose, okay? There are issues like safety, gain sharing, that can help both parties, okay? So you can have win-win things in collective bargaining and labor relations. Okay, to recap the entire chapter 9 here, a couple things. All right, number 1, unions allow employees to bargain collectively if they choose. And the reason they bargain collectively is because they have a little more power in numbers. However, fewer are choosing to bargain collectively, so the rate of unionization is down in Canada over the last certainly 25 years. Number 2, there's 3 players in the labor relation. There's management, unions, and society. Okay, government represents society. So the union, what they're looking for, they want more money, more rights over how we're going to run the place. Management wants more profit, and they want to retain the control that they have over the place, and the government is in the middle, being the referee, making sure the playing field is level. Number 3, the legal framework for labor relations includes a common core of requirements. Some of those requirements include things like a certification process, good faith bargaining. The labor board acts as a referee. There's rules around strikes and lockouts, and there's a grievance procedure that's used to adjudicate disputes during the course of a collective agreement when the contract's still in effect. Number 4, union organizing process. Rather simple. You have potential people in the bargaining union sign cards as an expression of interest. The labor board defines what the bargaining unit will look like. You might have to tweak it a little bit from what you came up with when you were signing cards. Employees vote. If you get a majority rules, then you go to the next step, which is negotiating the first collective agreement. If you're able to negotiate a collective agreement, the union takes it back to the employees and they vote, and that they approve the contract. Lo and behold, you're away to the races. Your union is in effect. Number 5, process of negotiating there's really 2 main things in labor relations, really, is negotiating the agreement. We talked a little bit about some of the ins and outs and how to do that, and then administering the agreement, okay, making sure that both parties live up to what they agreed to in the collective agreement. And there's a grievance procedure is sort of the fallback when people are unable to agree to what they've come, when there's a disagreement on whether they're following the agreement. And finally, the last one is not all issues necessarily have to be win-lose in labor relations. You also have, you have win-win issues, okay? Safety is a really good example of that, right? So not everything is a zero-sum game. All right, that's it. That's all. That's the entirety, the beauty of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 deals with global human resources management, and that's next up.